Everyone, welcome to BigData Thoughts. Today we are going to talk about blockchains. What are blockchains? Why they were needed? What are the key concepts? We'll talk about those. So let's get started. So why did blockchain come into picture, or why did somebody think about this kind of a concept? So specifically talking about financial transactions. When we talk about financial transactions, those are extremely critical. They should be secure. They should be stored efficiently. And wherever we are storing the financial transactions, it should be a very reliable and cost effective system. So there was always this need to have some kind of a mechanism or storage where financial transactions could be stored and which could be secure, efficient, and reliable. Because few of the reasons of why this needed a special kind of a system where you could store financial transactions is because there are a lot of complexities when we are dealing with financial transactions. They can be exposed to a lot of vulnerabilities, there can be inefficiencies, and current transaction systems that were getting used were very costly. Also, with the growth of e-commerce websites, online banking, in-app purchases, IoT, when we entered into this whole of the data growth world, the transaction volumes became huge, and there are so many places from which financial transactions are occurring, like from your mobiles, from in-app purchases, etc. So there was definitely a need to have a very robust, secure, efficient system to store those financial transactions. So all in all, what was needed is faster payment networks that can be trusted. So that is where the seed of blockchain was born, or that is how blockchain started. Now it is used in variety of industries, not just financial transactions, but the initial starting was from there. The need came from there. Now, even before we talk about what is a blockchain, we need to understand something which is known as Bitcoin. And this term you may have heard a lot of times in context of blockchain. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is nothing but a digital currency. So before, like earlier, we were dealing with currencies which were hard currencies like dollars, rupees, or whatever it is, but those were all hard currencies. But Bitcoin is a digital currency. It's a virtual currency which was launched in 2009. And typically, it's not known who launched it, but there is a pseudo name called Satoshi Nakamoto, which is used as the originator of Bitcoin. And unlike all our traditional currencies, which are issued by a central authority, so whether it is a dollar or a pound or a rupee, all of these currencies are hard currencies. They have a central authority or a bank which issues them. But for Bitcoin, there is no central authority, no one controls it. They are not printed. As I said, they are virtual, they are digital currencies, they are not hard currencies. And the way Bitcoin works is it is enabled by a peer-to-peer computer network which is made up of different user machines. It's a virtual money which is floating around between a peer-to-peer computer network. So that's Bitcoin. So it is built on the foundation of blockchain, which serves as Bitcoin's shared ledger. So Bitcoin is built on the foundation of the blockchain. And blockchain is just like a ledger which keeps account of what transactions are happening. So if we now talk about what is blockchain. So blockchain, think of it as a shared immutable ledger that facilitates the process of recording transactions and tracking assets in any business network. Now, this asset can be a house, a car, cash, land, or any intangible asset. It's not really, the asset is not always tangible. It can be intangible, something like intellectual property, copyrights, patents, any kind of asset, whether it is a tangible or intangible asset. Blockchain is meant to keep track of that asset. So anything that has value can be tracked on blockchain, and it will reduce the risk and it will cut on cost. Now, the way we should think of blockchain is it's like a ledger. Ledger is nothing but in previous to blockchain. When we if we talk about in a transactional world, ledger is nothing but a book which maintains the debits and credits and records every transaction. So you can use the ledger to track what finances were spent or what came in into any business. So blockchain is nothing but a virtual ledger, but it has some benefits. It's a shared ledger. So Among all the people who are transacting, they don't have now their own ledgers. They have a shared ledger which is immutable. So once you make an entry into that ledger, you can't change that entry. You have to insert another entry now. So it is basically shared immutable ledger which is tracking all your financial transactions. How does this blockchain architecture work? So blockchain architecture gives the participants the ability to share a ledger, and it's a peer-to-peer architecture. What is happening? Any transaction. So let's say there are a number of people in that peer-to-peer network, and there is a transaction being made. Everything will be recorded in that blockchain, but it's a single immutable ledger. So all of the people are watching that single ledger. They are not maintaining their own copies. And this peer-to-peer replication means that every participant, we can call them nodes, is acting as both a publisher and a subscriber. So publisher because they are publishing changes that they are doing to the ledger, and they are consuming changes which other people are publishing. So any node or any peer in the peer-to-peer network is both a publisher and a subscriber. Each node can receive or send transactions to other nodes, and this whole data gets synchronized across the network because there is a single immutable ledger, so it needs to be synced for everyone to access the same information. All the transactions that we are making are secured, authenticated, and verifiable. They are authenticated, they are only made by those people who are there in the peer-to-peer network. Now let's understand a few of the key terms which will give us a better understanding of this whole blockchain concept. First of all, consensus. What is consensus? As we know in English, consensus means where people agree. So for any transaction to be valid, it's a shared ledger which is storing transactions for everybody. When a transaction is put into that ledger, it will be valid only if all the participants agree on its validity. So there has to be a consensus. Provenance. What does provenance mean? Now, participants should know from where this asset came from and how it changed ownership over time. So I'll take an example to explain, but just understand the term that provenance means participants, all of the participants in that peer-to-peer network know where this asset came from because we are tracking some asset, tangible or intangible, through blockchain. So they should know the origin of the asset, and they would also know how it changed hands or how ownership changed or what happened to that asset throughout its life, because we are recording everything in the blockchain ledger. Immutability. Now this is one of the most important terms because why blockchains became so prevalent or why they were tamper free or why they were considered to be secure is because they are immutable. None of the participants can tamper with the transaction after it has been recorded in their ledger. Once the transaction gets recorded and everybody agrees to it, there is a consensus, nobody can change that. If that transaction was wrong, there was some error, there will be a new transaction that will be inserted into the ledger to reverse the previous transaction. And both the transactions will be visible to all the parties. So people know, okay, the first transaction came in, it was not correct. There is another transaction on top of that. But you cannot change the existing transactions. Hence, it is very, very secure, and that's why we call it immutable. And another concept here is finality. Finality means there is a single shared ledger which is providing you one place to understand what the asset is, what is the ownership, how the whole life cycle of that asset is, what transactions happen. So there is finality in this blockchain. Now let us look at an example just to clarify how blockchain is. And this is some example I've taken from one of the blogs which says, let's say there is a car that is a manufacturer is producing a car. They are giving it to a dealer, then to a leasing company, then to the leasing who is leasing it. And finally, when the car is used for many years, it will go to a scrap merchant. Let's assume that this is the life cycle of a tangible asset, car. So definitely along the whole of this journey, the ownership is changing from manufacturer to dealer to leasing company to leasee to scrap merchant. And when we say leasee, there can be multiple people who lease it, right? So how do you track this ownership? In a traditional way, everybody would have their own ledger and they would be tracking there. So if a regulator wants to know what is happening, he or she has to actually look at so many ledgers and then match it to see how this whole asset kind of transferred ownership. So what transactions happened, what was the amount. So this is difficult, error prone. There is a lot of manual touch points and lot of overhead for the auditor to go through, a regulator to go through multiple ledgers and tally them. But if we look at blockchain now this is a very simple example. Blockchain has many complicated use cases that it can incorporate. But just to make things clear, I've taken this very simple example. Now, in blockchain, what will happen is you will no longer have multiple ledgers. You will have a shared ledger. This is the shared ledger, and there are smart contracts, which are contracts for the asset transfer. Now, everybody so the regulator doesn't need to go to multiple people and ledgers. They can just look at the blockchain, which is the shared ledger. It will give the entire history of change of ownership. And everybody, whether it is a scrap merchant, a dealer, a leasee, anybody, everybody is a peer in that network and they are committing their transactions into this shared ledger. That is how blockchain works. So it is very secure, it is easy, it is maintainable, it stores the entire history. Now let us look at what are the advantages of having using blockchain. So like I said, of course there is time saving because there can be many complex transactions, multi-party interactions like even in the previous example. Now all of this time of going to different people looking at their ledgers is cut down. So it comes to minutes from days. The transaction settlement is faster. It doesn't require verification by a central authority because there is no central authority, as I said, when we talk about blockchains, bitcoins. There is cost saving. How there is cost saving? Multiple ways. First is there is less oversight needed because we are operating in a peer-to-peer network which is self-policed and all of the participants there are authenticated, authorized and known. There are no intermediaries who are doing all this transaction. So it is between the actual parties. That cost is reduced and there is no duplication of effort. There are no multiple ledgers. There is a shared ledger. So it is definitely cost saving, time saving. It is very tight security. It is foolproof against tampering, fraud, and cybercrime because we just have to take care of one shared ledger and have an authenticated network of peers who can commit to that and you can protect that shared ledger. So it has tighter security. Enhanced privacy because we are using IDs and permissions of all the users that are there in the peer-to-peer network. They are committing the transactions. So these permissions can be expanded for special users like auditor, etc., who want to review it. But essentially, all the peers are having IDs and permissions to commit to that shared ledger. So it has enhanced privacy. It has improved auditability because we have a shared ledger which is keeping track of each and every transaction, and each transaction is immutable. So there is no tampering and it provides you the entire audit of what changed over time. It has increased operational efficiency because we have made it purely digitized. All the assets in entirety are digitized and everything is there in the ledger. So it is more speedier, it is safer, it increases your entire efficiency rather than having manual multiple ledgers. It is distributed and sustainable. Of course, it is distributed. The ledger is shared, it is updated with every transaction, there is a consensus taken. And this is selectively replicated among participants, and that all happens in real time. It is not controlled by a single authority, so the blockchain can continue even if one individual entity leaves. So it is not dependent on a single entity. And it is secure, private, indelible. So permissions and cryptography prevent unauthorized access. Like I said previously also, people who are there in the network who are participants are actually who they claim to be. That is taken care of. Confidentiality is maintained through cryptographic techniques. So there are multiple techniques that are used that blockchain uses to secure the data. It is transparent, auditable. Everything is transparent. Every transaction is time stamped, ordered. So it is ordered. It's like a stack, right, where you keep on putting things. So first thing came first, the next one came later. So it is time stamped, it is ordered, and it is not mutable. So it is immutable. So that way it is very transparent and auditable. It is consensus based, like we spoke about the key term consensus. So everybody, all the network participants must agree that the transaction is valid. So it's not that anybody can go in and put in any fraudulent transaction. It has to tally with the previous ones. It has to be a consensus. And it is orchestrated and flexible because business rules and smart contracts are in place. It is very much flexible to change as per those contracts, and it is also very orchestrated. So, as we saw in that previous example, there are transactions that are getting stored, and there are smart contracts associated with those transactions. Those can be defined. Contracts are nothing like but just like an agreement or a business rule for those transactions. So blockchain has its own, like whatever benefits I spoke about. There are multiple use cases. Now, one of them we saw, there can be another use case which is like if there are medicines that are getting transferred in a, let's say in a truck from one place to another. Those medicines are very sensitive to temperature. So what we can do is we can have sensors attached to those boxes of medicines which control the temperature, and while the medicines are getting transported, the temperatures are getting sent. So consider those temperature recordings to be stored in blockchain. So there is no fraudulent business where you can say, I mean, you can look at whether temperature was actually maintained. You're getting that data stored in a blockchain and you have that order that throughout the journey was the temperature maintained or not. So this is just another example. There can be many such examples. So the purpose of telling this example is that this whole thing is not just for financial transaction. It can be used in multiple use cases. So this was a quick summary of what blockchains are, why they came in, advantages, some use case. I hope that this gives you a good idea of what blockchain as a concept is. So please like, share and subscribe to my channel to get more interesting videos. Thank you everyone.